As a child, I was very timid. I lived a form of isolation. If I had to approach another child and ask her to play, I would rehearse the sentence in my mind many times, and my inner voice would say, "What if she says no?" So I would fear rejection. And it was not much easier with adults, because the floor where my eyes often rested and their eyes were a long, long journey. And when I would reach the other person's eye, I was flushed and red with embarrassment. I had been loved as a child and was very protected, but clearly that had not helped my social skills. I didn't know that I was, through my vulnerability, developing my empathic self. I lived a great change when I was 10. I moved to a different country from the United States to Italy, and I was so different from my peers I could not compare in any way. My embarrassment was such and so extreme that I had to seek something that would help me break out of my shell. And that came, you might smile, but in the form of a song. James Taylor, "You've Got a Friend." Well, I would sing that song when you're down and troubled and you need a helping hand. I really would feel that someone was listening. Music then took an important role in my life because it expanded my perceptions, and so did art. And I became, after studying art history at school, I became an entertainment reporter. I used empathy, actually, as a tool, unconsciously, to bring out the person behind the rock star. And that happened with Mick Jagger and Paul McCartney, with Elton John and Bruce Springsteen. A long, long list of wonderful people who have a very strong power over the public, but that I could narrate through the person that was behind the star. This happened until I was graced by the biggest work of art, which is childbearing. At this point, I am naturally plugged into my predisposition to be empathic, and I had a very wonderful relation with the child growing inside me. And when I gave birth, the most intense pain I had ever experienced that shattered my body was soothed by the sense of connection with every living being. And when my baby was laid on my stomach, I felt deep joy and also a very strong sense of responsibility. Naturally rooted, connected to my empathic self, I started focusing a lot on the quality of every choice, the quality of gestures, the quality of things that I brought into our space, the quality of simple choices. Of course, I didn't know about the mirror mechanism rationally, but that is really what a parent does with a child. A parent acts like a mirror, even beyond our rational understanding, in the deep, deep subconscious. And through a chain of empathic connections, every choice in my child rearing was made, from education to healthcare. So from an individual experience, I was living the experience of a community of people who shared values and who shared interests. But then as my child grew, and I was mirroring his celebration of life, attracting the information I needed, but on the other hand, he was growing out of the nest, I had to come to realize that society moved along very different principles. So while mirroring, I was aware of a deep relation between empathy, synchronicity, and collaboration. It seemed like collectively society was an amass of very backward, stupid people. And I realized the B side of empathy, that anger sheds anger, fear sheds fear. Collectively, the threats to our well-being were out of control. Social and economic disparity were out of control. War and destruction were and still are today out of control. So I felt paralyzed. I felt completely disempowered. And I would flick through magazines and see the photo of a malnourished child, and then maybe a few pages later, read about the 4,000 tons of good food wasted every day in my country. I would read about a miracle chemical that kills all bacteria, and then I would learn how many problems for the health of us people and for the environment are caused by these invisible chemicals, far beyond what people know about. So I had to listen to my inner voice. You can't just turn the pages. You need to pay attention to how you feel and do something about it. So from preoccupied, I decided to empower myself. And to do that, I began to do research. And that's where I discovered that since 1968, Aurelio Peccei's Club of Rome, since he had gathered 30 top world scientists and economics in a room for 2 days to discuss the issues that humanity was inevitably going to face at that pace of growth, nothing had changed. In 1972, Aurelio Peccei commissioned a research, The Limits to Growth, one of the first computer simulations that put the rate of economic growth, population growth, on the same level of a planet with finite resources. Everything I was reading could have been written today. The gap between what we know and how we live devoured me. Once again, I felt paralyzed. At that time, An Inconvenient Truth came out, Al Gore's film, yet another reminder that we are overshooting nature's capacity to regenerate. And while the discussion got very ugly, top world leaders having deep arguments as to whether we are to be held responsible for the runaway problems that we face, not only in terms of global warming, but increasing levels of pollution, decreasing availability of natural resources. First, water. And if you look on international newspapers, every single day, even today, there was an important feature of the major problems that many countries are living due to water scarcity. So while that debate was going on and people were pointing fingers and saying, no, you're responsible, no, I'm not responsible, I thought it was no longer time to sit idle. And I embraced the eco experience. I became the eco queen. I discovered local vegetables, seasonal vegetables, which are so intelligent. Nature is so smart, it makes warming vegetables in winter and cooling vegetables in summer. And I learned about all the advantages, not only to the person, but to the environment in using ecological detergents, because they don't leave traces in our clothes which cause allergies, and they don't leave traces on our plates. I bought local water from my region if I were to use it bottled, but I also discovered that tap water is often perfectly fine. And so I decided to experiment with empathy even further, because I had amassed so many interesting solutions. I decided to write a book. And actually, again, the relation between empathy, synchronicity, and collaboration is that I thought of writing a book, and the opportunity came to me. So my question was, how am I going to get people to be curious, to want to try out all the wonderful things that I've explored and I have found so incredibly effective? I created a cast of characters that mirror unsustainable habits, common unsustainable habits that we all fall into and that can easily be changed. And that worked. I was invited on television where I hosted a very successful segment for 5 years that led me from domestic solutions to really witnessing massive transformations at the levels of companies, municipalities, organizations of all kinds. And it was so wonderful to witness how much energy could be saved by converting to renewable energies, and how many tons of garbage a year were saved from simply recycling correctly or selling food without packaging. So once again, though, I started to get frustrated because I saw that solutions were so at hand, yet they weren't scaling up fast enough. You're all familiar with this image. Well, at that time, I met an American photographer named Chris Jordan, who turns raw, crude statistics into powerful images. So Hokusai's wave became this, and when you zoom in, it looks like that. And when you zoom in further, it looks like that. Gyre depicts 2.4 million pieces of plastic, equal to the estimated number of pounds of plastic pollution that enter our world's oceans every hour. All the plastic in the image was collected from the Pacific Ocean. The oceanographer Charles Moore, who you can see in a documentary narrated by Jeremy Irons called Trashed, documented that in our oceans, and he documented this not statistically but actually he trawled in all our waters, and he found that there are 6 parts of plastic to 1 part plankton. I think it takes time to digest such intense information. This is huge. I mean, our livestock in the oceans are living on plastic. That plastic then enters our bodies. So that brought me to think that the meaning of growth really does have to change from a quantitative to a qualitative measure. And the question of what the impact of how we live has on other people and ecosystems has to be our daily question, but not because we impose it, because we should be desiring it from our deepest guts. Our daily choices are cumulative. And again, in science, it's proven how tissues collect cumulatively everything that we ingest. Well, it's the same thing for our planet, which is just a living organism deeply connected to ours. The European Union did something similar to what Chris Jordan has done. It created a parallel between the physical weight of objects that we use every day and their environmental weight. And they did that by summing all the resources that are used to design and produce and distribute and use and discard these 4 iconic objects that pass through all of our hands every day. And they also included in this weight all the industrial waste that is generated. So a personal computer from 1.5 kilos actually weighs 1,500 kilos. That's summing up all these substances used and discarded. Same for a microchip like the ones in our credit cards, for example, from 0.09 grams to 20 kilos. Our cell phone from 100 grams to 75 kilos. Our toothbrush from 10 grams to 1.5 kilos. So here I am, living empathy, feeling connected, feeling deeply frustrated at the same time. At that time, I meet Jeremy Rifkin, the American economist, and I interviewed him, and the core of our conversation was about his theory of the empathic civilization, which he constructed based on the advancement in evolutionary biology, cognitive science, and research that are challenging long-held shibboleths about human nature and the meaning of the human journey. And he talks about a sleepy little laboratory in Parma. I'm sorry, Professor Rizzolatti is not here to comment that, but that's the way that Jeremy Rifkin describes Rizzolati's headquarters. It is by serendipity demonstrated that the same neurons fire in a monkey watching a human crack a shell as in the monkey cracking the shell himself. So Rifkin says, well, this is not, my idea of an empathic civilization is not utopia. It's deeply rooted in our sense of frailty and in our celebration for life. And he says our primary drive is actually to belong, to feel like we are all sharing a journey on this planet. But secondary drives come in when the first ones, when the primary ones are not met. So Rifkin says, well, possibly empathy and the mirror mechanism can be a way to accelerate a sense of belonging, our feeling like we are all part of a journey together. So the challenges and opportunities are great, and rationally we're not getting far enough, so possibly coupling empathy with thought and the great intelligence that humanity expresses can help us scale up. I'm sure you all know about the Copenhagen theory of change. When in the 1970s the oil crisis hit, some citizens in Copenhagen decided that they just were not going to put themselves to have to deal with this scarcity of oil, and they were going to ride their bicycles, even when it was not necessarily convenient. And that has stayed as a social behavior. And Elinor Ostrom's governing the commons was, deeply rooted in this Copenhagen theory of change. While news of just a couple of days, William Nordhaus of Yale University instead thinks that for the reason that top world leaders and top industries are still failing at coming to a common agreement on what we should do to curb this runaway system of decline that we're in, he proposes the idea of climate clubs, where countries who do agree that we need to act now and act fast can get together and can share good practices and possibly enforce limitations where necessary. So looking ahead really does mean embracing responsibility to evolve beyond this take, make, waste model. And curiosity is a wonderful ally. It's a driver of change, because curiosity for all the technologies that are being developed, but also curiosity to learn from people who have lived before us, from our elders, who are an incredible source of wisdom and knowledge, what from the past can be precious for the future. So to prefer hypotheses to certainties, to question, grounded in the present, but with a long-term vision. Now we know that rationally human beings have a very hard time with this. So feeling empathic not only with other people, but with our planet helps. Because in nature we choose to regenerate, but we're also filling it with trash. I took this photograph in a very remote strip of white sand in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And I have not come across one beach in the last 10 years where I've not found some form of trash washed on the shore. To not consider all the invisible trash that we swim in. So we can measure the negative impact of our health on our planet, but how can we measure empathy? Well, my point is that we can only measure it through experience. 3 years ago, I was at the first European conference of an organization called Singularity University. Its purpose is to address humanity's grand challenges through exponential technologies. So Amanda was speaking to 200 people from the stage. And at one point she said, okay, I would now ask like one person yes and one person no to stand up. So we did. I ended up standing up, and she said, now look to your left and look to your right. What do you see? Well, of course, the person next to me was sitting. So at a distance, I saw the other person. She said, this is what I see. I cannot look at people eye to eye. I cannot have a heart-to-heart hug unless I ask them to straddle me. I began to cry. That was the power of empathy. And today Amanda walks thanks to an exoskeleton, which is possible only because different knowledges and different professions came together. orthopedics, engineers, designers, biologists. And that is the time we're living in. We're living in a time where collaboration is our greatest opportunity, and empathy is that capacitator of extraordinary collaboration. Empathy is also what led Amanda to believe that she could one day walk again and attract the opportunity that came to her, because she actually got a call from the company that designed that. She didn't go look for them. They found her because she was certain that one day she would stand on her feet again. The same story regarding Francesca and Roberto, who were two young parents who gave birth to the little boy you see in the picture, to then discover 5 days after his birth that he had suffered a prenatal stroke. That means that 50% of his brain was dead. Very little is known about prenatal strokes. They were clearly in a panic, and they did research, and they came across Rizzolati's mirror mechanism. And they very patiently began to grasp objects in front of the little boy. And surely enough, he started to move his left arm and his whole left side of his body. When I told Rizzolati, when I met him the first time to interview him for my last book, I told him about this story, and he said, no, that's a miracle. That's not a miracle. Their miracle is that they actually believed they could do that. And again, empathy and synchronicity, well, I was, by chance, a witness of their meeting with Rizzolati. So I had spoken to Rizzolati about them, and then I, by chance, was at a conference where they met, and they are now working with Rizzolati's team to help the child grow, and to help the world know that prenatal strokes and this type of damage are not as rare as we think. So the power of empathy really is to attract like-minded people, to connect, to create collaboration, as I said, to generate trust. And to this point, I will share a snippet of an interview we had yesterday with Professor Ishiguro, who has designed his Geminoid twin robot. He actually says that by tests that they're running, people are tending to trust robots more than humans. Is that what we want? Or maybe is it worth thinking that we can exert our empathic power and stay human and stay together? Empathy allows us to be vulnerable. Well, possibly if the pilot who drove the plane into a mountain last week had felt like he could express his vulnerability, he would have sought help before committing suicide along with 150 other people. Empathy allows us to express solidarity. It breaks barriers, develops tolerance, and we know how much that is a tool. And it allows us to cohere in larger units. And again, because the top-down solutions falter, maybe small communities coming together at a faster and faster pace can help us scale up. Empathy is very important in technologies. How much do we use emoticons to warm up our cold digital communications? Empathy in robots, we know, is a vital tool today. So one of the neuroscientists who got very passionate about Rizzolati's discovery, his name is Villanur Ramachandran, and he hypothesizes that the mirror neuron developed about 50 to 100,000 years ago when humanity in a relatively short time learned to make fire and use tools and invented language. So I think we're faced with the need of a cultural Big Bang, and hopefully coupling intelligence with empathy will help us scale up, because as Rizzolati says in the interview, our society needs empathy like never before. It works. And before we finish, I ask you 1 minute of your time, and I would like you to choose the person next to you. So 2 by 2, everybody please. Those who don't have someone next to them, please go sit next to someone. Can you sit next to each other? Thank you. I would appreciate it if everyone participates. Does everyone have a second person next to them? Even in the back? Okay, now if you can turn towards each other. And simply look at each other in the eyes. I will tell you when to stop.